my shirt kind of rode up. And I heard the officer go, "Wait a minute." And then I felt him grab my left wrist.
You know what, gang? This show has been on the air for over a year now, and I cannot say enough about how many times there's been a guest on this show who comes on and says, look, I got into a defensive encounter and I talked to the police, or I didn't know what to do when all the dust settled. Firearms legal protection is there so you can win the fight after the fight, and you're able to carry on with your life. It is the only defensive legal membership that Active Self-Protection recommends, and there's a reason for that. They're committed to helping you train and educate yourself, and that's why they're invested in bringing these educational and training podcasts and videos to you. Please thank them for their support and consider them for your needs. Check their plans out at get-asp.com/FLP. Get-asp.com/FLP.
Hey gang, just a heads up, we had a little bit of an audio issue this week with our guest's audio. A little bit of skips and jumps. I think it's still eminently listenable, so hopefully it won't distract you too much from the content, and I hope you enjoy this episode.
Alrighty, gang. Welcome back to the Active Self-Protection Podcast. I am your host, Mike Williver, and I am your favorite former Fed. And if I'm not, I should be. With us today, a new friend of mine, Chris Shin. He is from the glorious Midwest, Missouri to be specific. He is married with 2 kids, and he has had a rather interesting incident in which he was detained and arrested for a firearms offense. And we're going to discuss what happened and why and what we think could have been done differently. So, Chris, thanks so much for being here. I appreciate you coming on.
Well, thank you, Mike, for having me. It's arguably an honor to be on your podcast.
I think that's pretty arguable, actually. He was just buttering me up with telling me how much he loves the Ask videos on the channel. But
big fan.
Yeah, so. I appreciate that. So first of all, talk to us about growing up. I know you have some law enforcement people in your family. Talk to us. You don't have to name names, but talk to us about that and who those people are and how they shape your view of police and sheriffs and law enforcement in general.
Definitely. So I was born in a pretty small town up north a little bit. My family, I want to say, oh goodness, probably 1984, 83 or 84, we opened up a family business for residential care facilities. Mm-hmm. And basically we had a number of group homes and we took care of people with physical and mental illnesses and stuff like that. So I grew up in a household of people that kind of took care of other people at all times.
Right.
And then not only that, my grandfather and my grandmother were strong proponents in my life and growing up. We all lived pretty much under the same roof, me, my mom, my dad, my grandma, my grandpa, because we had the company business to run. And then my grandfather was retired law enforcement. He worked in the PD for, 25, 30 years, something like that. And he came out of law enforcement in the 60s, I want to say. 60s or 70s, maybe late 70s. And then my uncle, I think at 20 years old, he jumped into law enforcement. And from there to now, he's still active law enforcement. As I said, he's the sheriff where I'm from, for the county. But so kind of throughout my whole life, I was raised by pretty much everybody in my family. My grandma, my grandpa, my uncle, my mom, my dad, my aunt was a part of it too. We all just worked together. And you know that saying, it takes a community to raise a kid. That's pretty much my life. So when I turned, 18, it was a few weeks from 18, my grandfather asked me if I wanted to work in the family business. And I was like, yeah, definitely. This is what I've grown up with.
Meaning law enforcement.
No.
Meaning the care facility. I got you. Okay.
Yeah. By this time, my uncle was the only law enforcement in the family at the time. He was kind of the one that took up the mantle and mm-hmm. kept it going. I think I got a cousin or two that works for a sheriff department over in the western side of the states. But as far as active law enforcement now, that's my uncle. He kind of was the man. But I learned a lot from that man. He was like a big brother to me growing up. So,
and you mentioned before we hit the record button, you mentioned that he was one of the signatories of various elected law enforcement officials that signed a pledge, basically saying, "Hey, we're not going to enforce any kind of crazy draconian gun laws," which I love.
Exactly. We didn't always agree growing up, especially in my teenage days. I was a dummy back then, but
We all
he's
were.
always he's always stood as one of the foundations in common sense and logic and acting and doing right as far as like being a young man growing up and developing into a full-fledged man.
Yeah.
He always kind of tried to push me in the right direction. So,
I love to hear it. So,
and
oh,
yeah, dare I say, some of it's stuck.
yeah. Well done.
But
Well done, you. So, talk to us about your personal history with self defense. I know the incident in question where you were carrying a firearm, so obviously you've done some kind of training. So, talk to us about your history when you started considering self defense to be important to you.
so I was a very young man. I went down to one of the big cities here in my state, down in St. Louis. A concert down there. This probably about 12 or 13 years ago. And after the concert, I'm going to keep it kind of brief because I get a little emotional thinking about it.
Gotcha.
I witnessed an event at a gas station where a robbery occurred, and an elderly gentleman lost his life. And I watched it. I was, goodness, 19, 20 years old, didn't know a thing from my butt to my elbow. I didn't do nothing. I froze. I watched it, and I could do nothing. Afterwards, it took weeks. It took a few weeks of thinking, digesting, processing. I went to buddy of mine. I wasn't old enough to have a pistol yet, because you got to be 21 to have a pistol.
Mm-hmm.
And so I borrowed one of his shotguns and kept it in my house just for home defense. I kind of woke up and realized that like something could happen at any given moment, and I kept that by my bed for quite a while. And then when I turned 21, bought my first handgun, which was, again, from my neighbor. I bought it through a private sales, and it was a cute little 25 Derringer. You know what I'm talking about?
Yeah.
And I didn't know anything about firearms. I just wanted something to keep in my pocket to protect myself with if necessary, or to keep an event like what I witnessed from occurring. And so I carried that for about a year. And then I purchased a Bersa 380 Thunder, and I carried that for another 4 or 5 years, open carry, because Missouri is, we're an open carry state. I never really saw initially starting out the need for a concealed carry weapons license, because I didn't go anywhere. I didn't leave the state, and my state's open carry. So, why bother? That's a bad way of thinking, just so anybody needs to know.
Chris, that's why we're here, man. We're here to dispel these myths, and especially to not shame new people who make, what we now as experienced firearms handlers to be goofy decisions. We want to make sure people know, look, if you bought some wacky, if you bought a little Derringer as your first gun, you didn't know what you didn't know, and that's fine.
Exactly. Looking back, and if I can get this whole thing squared away that we're going to be discussing, I'm definitely going to pursue my concealed carry weapons license, because I believe that if you carry a firearm, even if you decide you want to openly carry, because I believe there's a myth in some places that if you have a carry weapons license, then you're limited to just concealing your carry.
Mm-hmm.
Like you can't open carry with that, and that's a myth. But so, like I said, I open carried for a number of years. In 2017, Missouri moved from open carry to a constitutional carry state, and I began concealing my firearm,
mm-hmm.
because, as you know, I don't leave the state very often. And if I ever do leave the state, I will abide by the state laws that I'm going to.
Mm-hmm.
I have a number of friends in Illinois, so I usually just don't take my firearm to Illinois. I don't spend a lot of time there. We'll put it that way.
Sure.
I don't like being in Illinois too much. But I try to abide by any laws in any states that I'm in. So with being in Missouri and constitutional carry, I began concealing. And so since 2017, I've concealed my firearm. Now, as far as my training, it's been a couple of months since I've been to the range. There's a range down here that I found that I go to frequently, but when I was living up in Hannibal, my hometown there, I would go to the range probably 4-5 times a month. something like that.
It's above average
I
for
worked
sure.
quite a lot. Yeah, yeah. And I would, how do I word this? Eat every single video that I find on YouTube or any other social media where I could find somebody that was, proficient in firearms usage and actually had some good tips and advice and everything like that. I found a gentleman a number of years ago by the name of UF Pro on YouTube, and I believe that's his name. He's a Israeli gentleman, and he teaches a lot of like different forms of specifically for security teams and like law enforcement teams for just basically uh, controlling of your weapon to do in different settings and everything like that. So pretty much anything that I could find, especially with John and stuff, as far as how to act with your weapon. And I found active self-protection and just took all of that. And every time I'd go out onto the range, I'd kind of adapt and some of the active self-protection extra stuff, adapt some of those drills and stuff onto my own drills. And so just for, I would say about a good solid 10 years out of 12 years I've carried, I've taken a very serious approach as far as etiquette with my firearm, the ability to actually use my firearm efficiently, again, the like John puts, the moral and legal aspects of it.
Yep, it's critical.
And I've just tried to be a responsible gunner. I've tried to be one of the people that that you would look for to be like, hey, this right here is a responsible gun owner. This is what it looked like.
Yeah, we need a lot more of that. Frankly, we need a whole lot more of that. Because being here in Arizona, you see a lot of really sketchy, goofy, open carry stuff going on where people are clearly not aware of their surroundings, they're not aware of their environment, their awareness of who's close enough to snatch their XD out of their Uncle Mike's sausage sack that has no retention. It gets scary, man.
And I've gotten now to where these are the only types of holsters that I will ever purchase.
So for the listeners, you were holding up a
Kydex.
Yeah, Kydex AIWB appendix or no?
Yep.
Okay.
Appendix.
Gotcha.
I have about 13 or 14 different ones of those. And I don't like loose retention. I got to have, if I'm moving around and running or something like that, my firearm's got to stay there. It's got to be hard to take from me. And I found during my own personal exercises that personally to me, appendix inside the waistband is the best possible way to carry a firearm. It's, if someone tries to fight you for it, you can ball up if need be. It's very hard to get to for someone else, but it's incredibly easy to get to when needed for a defensive purpose for someone like us.
So this month we're doing the weight loss challenge on the Extra channel, but there's a Facebook page for it as well. So me, John, and Neil are going to fat shame each other relentlessly until somebody loses the most weight. Part of my problem with appendix, I think you're correct. I think AIWB is the superior for concealed carry. It is the superior position. There's no doubt about it. All the myths about, blowing a hole in your femoral artery or blowing your meaty bits off or whatever, and all this.
Unless you're being absolutely negligent.
Right. Those myths have been put to bed, I think, sufficiently. I just can't do it until I lose a little bit more weight. Now, John pulls it off. He and I both have a bit of a paunch. For some reason, I have this consistent issue with the gun, the hand of the grip of the gun and the back of the slide presenting a little too much, and I can't wear quadruple extra large shirts, but I'm going to get there. I promise you, I'm going to get there. So let's talk for a moment about the incident. Walk us through what happened that day. It was an issue at one of your kids' schools, and it didn't go very well. So walk us through that.
No, it was the second day of school. I will kind of backstory it a little bit because there's quite a bit to it.
Sure.
Actually, just to show you, this is exactly how much there is to it.
Okay. For the listeners, he's holding up a rather thick file of papers, which looks like a lot of headache.
Yes. There's a lot of paperwork there. So last year, the school district that we're in, one of the schools, lost our child 4 times. Now, at the time of this occurring on the 24th of August, which is when the incident occurred. We had miscounted and thought it was 5 times last year and then a 6th time this year. But it was 4 times last year and a 5th time this year.
I feel like 1 time is too many. How old was this child at the time?
She's 6 years old.
Oh boy.
And she's a very, very tiny 6-year-old. My daughter is about a foot taller than her, and they're the same age. So she looks about 3. So last year, my wife and I, we tried our best to get it solved, to get the problem solved. We met with everybody needed to be met with. We met with the principal, assured us it wouldn't happen anymore, and it's not for that year. But it was almost to the end of the year anyway. So this year, when school started, we took a very, very proactive approach. My wife made many, many phone calls, sent many, many emails, confirming with transportation, the teacher, the principal, the secretaries at the school on what bus our daughter would be riding. And there would be no after-school functions or anything like that. He was going to school and from school on the bus. And they knew exactly what number it was. Now, the first day of school this year, we took our daughter in because we had not yet physically met the teacher. We'd only corresponded with, I think, once on the email that my wife sent. And so we met with her. And again, I reiterated to her, they lost her a number of times last year. Please make sure that she's on this number bus at the end of the day after today. Because we were going to pick her up on the first day to go have ice cream after school.
Nice.
And so, yeah, it was kind of a celebratory thing. So the second day of school, now I work overnights at this time. I'm still technically an employee there, and we'll get into that in a second. But I worked overnights at a school, all-girl college, as a security officer. And so I got home from work about 6 o'clock in the morning, got my daughter up, carried her down to the couch per usual. We got her mom up. We got her ready and got her off to the bus. And when we got to the bus, it was a new bus driver. I've never seen her before. So I decided, well, I'm a bit of, I guess you could say I cover all bases. Some people, I guess, would say it's overprotective, but no. I just say it's being reasonable.
If you're dealing with a system that's lost your 6-year-old 7 or 8 times, then yeah, I think you can't be too careful in that moment for sure.
Yeah. So I say to the bus driver, I'm standing at the bottom as my daughter's getting on, and I said, "Hey, I know you probably knew this year, but can you make sure this little blonde girl gets on this bus at the end of the school day? Because they have a bad habit of losing her." And she was like, "I'll try." And of course, the bus driver is not responsible for the kids getting on the bus.
Right.
She's just responsible for the kids when they're on the bus.
Sure.
And so ultimately I thanked her for, that extension of she'll try. And went up to my house, saw my wife off to work. She works about 40 minutes away. And gave her a kiss goodbye, and I went inside and I laid down and I took a nap. I woke up about 2:42 p.m. to my phone alarms, sat up, smoked a cigarette, took a drink of my cold coffee. I got up, and at the time, my carry arm that I have at the time is a Sig Sauer P3 65X.
Okay.
It's a wonderful platform. And I had it put up in my drawer, and I grabbed it, put it on my belt like I do every day. Walked into the bus stop. As I was leaving my house, my neighbor was sitting outside. Him and I are pretty close, and his son and my daughter are like best pals, inseparable. So much so that the school thought that they were brother and sister.
Okay.
So I see him outside sitting in his car waiting for the kids to get home because his son rides the same bus. And I say, "Hey, what's up, man?" He goes, "You walking to the stop?" And I was like, "Yeah." And he was like, "All right, cool." I was like, "I'll get him." And so I walked down to the bus stop, which was down and around the corner a little, about a block away. And so I went down there and I stood there. My wife called at 2:55 p.m. Or I'm sorry, 2:57 p.m. And she said, "Are you up? Are you down there?" And I was like, "Yeah, I'm awake. I'm at the bus stop." I'll call you back when I got her. And she's like, okay, I love you. Bye. And got off the phone. 3:05 p.m., the bus comes around the corner. It's her bus. And the bus driver's already looking at me like, uh-oh.
Yeah.
And I just knew it. I knew it. And she pulled up, and all the kids unloaded off of the bus. And my daughter and my neighbor's son were not on the bus.
Oh, boy.
And she goes, she didn't get on the bus, honey. And I'm like, are you sure? She's small. Maybe she slipped by. Can you call her name? And she hollered her name and kind of checked a couple of the seats. And she's like, she's not on the bus, honey. She didn't get on. So my mind clicked. My child's not where she's supposed to be. The last place that I know for 100% shadow, beyond a doubt, is the school. That's where she's at. That's
Right.
where she was last at. And so I ran up the street. I jumped in my neighbor's car and I said, dude, the kids didn't get out off the bus, man. We got to get to the school. And so we just went straight to the school. Now, keep in mind, as you said earlier, one time's too many.
Yep.
The amount of steps that we took to prevent this time from happening this new school year is beyond ridiculous to let it happen. So when I got to the school, I walked in and I was not very nice to them.
Uh-huh.
I questioned their ability to take care of children. I questioned their ability to do their jobs effectively. I told them that if this ever occurred again, I was going to get a lawyer and I was going to sue them into oblivion. And I did not say this nicely. I did use profanity. I, for lack of a better word, I chewed their butts out.
Mm-hmm.
They lost my child. It was the principal, the vice principal, and there was two secretaries that were in the room. They weren't the ones I was talking to. And the teacher was in there for about 2 minutes, and then she left. They ended up finding my child on a completely different bus, and they rerouted her to the school. So I kind of I waited while she was on her way there, kind of chewed her butts a little bit more. Now, keep in mind, I never made any physical threats of harm or anything like that. I think at one point I did ask the principal if she was so forgetful that she needed a tattoo on her hand of my child's bus number to remember where he was supposed to be, and that I would pay for it if that was what was necessary. But I didn't want to go in there, to scare anybody or to make any threats of harm or anything like that. I just wanted them to know that you people are responsible for our child. When she's not with us, when she's in this building, you're responsible for every child. And just losing our child, it's not acceptable. Losing anyone's child, that's not acceptable, especially in today's society. And so the bus got to the school. I walked outside to get my child. Now, my neighbor had not come in yet, and he was, I thought, calling his ex-wife to see if she maybe picked their son up. And he was speaking to a teacher at one point because I turned my head while I was in the office, and it's like an all glass. You can see straight outside. Mm-hmm. I could see he was talking to a teacher while he was sitting in the car at one point. But when I got out there and got my child off the bus that showed up, he goes, "Where's my son at?" And I was like, "Man, I don't know, dude. You're going to have to come inside and find your kid." When he came in, by the way, I did record the whole conversation in the office between me and the teachers and everything like that. And I recorded his conversation as well. And when he came in, he seemed really different from when we left the house. Like when we left the duplex there, he was alert. He was, talking and everything. He was, for lack of a better word, sober. Mm-hmm. And then he walked in and he seemed drunk. And you can hear me asking him, "Dude, what's wrong with you? You all right?" And he kind of just was like, "My son's missing," and he started yelling at him. Now, I think they thought that the same thing I thought, is that he was drunk, and that's when they alerted law enforcement. And about 5 minutes later, law enforcement showed up it was the high school resource officer. Mm-hmm. And he showed up with the safety and security director of the school, and they very quickly removed my neighbor out of there and kind of was talking to me. By this time, I had my daughter. I was waiting for her mom to get there. Her mom had to talk to the teacher or to the principal for a second to set up a time or to try and figure out how to keep this from happening more. And to figure out if we even need to keep our daughter in the school, if she's even safe there.
Right.
So, but she was still 30 minutes away because she'd been on the road for about 10 or 15 minutes by now. And she was on the phone with one of the secretaries as well. So they took my neighbor out and they were talking to him outside, and a few more law enforcement showed up for him outside. And the director of the security and safety came in and told me that at this point, since I had my daughter, we needed to go ahead and head out. And I was like, well, we can't. He's my ride and my wife's on her way, and I'm not willing to walk my child like 3 miles home.
Right.
That's not happening. And he's like, well, you can wait outside. And I was like, it's also 90 degrees out there, and I don't want my child sitting out in the sun waiting on her mom for 30 minutes. And he said, well, you can stay inside and if you don't cause a disruption. Now, for anybody listening, that means don't talk. And I did not take that advice. And I had stated that I don't know why I called law enforcement. You just were dealing with 2 angry fathers looking for their kids, and you had to do that. Goodness gracious. And then the security guy came back in and told me and my daughter we needed to stand out. And so we stood outside. About this time, there was about 4 law enforcement officers around my neighbor, and they were escorting him off the property. Then they came back over to me. The first responding officer told me, he kind of raised his voice at me a little bit. Now, keep in mind, this is not a calm conversation. Now, it's not irate, it's not belligerent or anything like this, but this is law enforcement dealing with 2 fathers, one who's possibly intoxicated and the other one who's a bit frustrated at the school's actions. And so the officer made a request to me to quit cussing, and I did comply with that. I said, I'll quit the cussing, but y'all are going to have to hear me. I'm a little bit mad about this. And they need to understand they lost someone's child. That's not acceptable, especially they lost her 6 times. Because at the time, I thought it was 6. But they eventually said, look, you're not meeting with the teacher today. Your wife's not going to have a conversation with anybody. It's time to go ahead and head out. And I was like, I don't like it, but, okay, I don't really want to. And he's like, you have permission to drive your neighbor's car, go pick him up, take him and your daughter home. And I should have stated it, but it wasn't in my head to state it for some reason. When we get in these situations, we think of the stuff we should have said later.
Sure.
And so I looked at the car seat, and it's not a car seat. It's a booster seat built for his son, made for his son's size. And she requires a toddler seat because she's so small. She'll just fly right out of a booster seat. And I stated, I'm waiting on my wife. She's got the car seat. And they said, no, you got to go. And I was like, no, okay. So I picked my child up. At this time, I right before I picked my child up, I ended the recording, which I should have kept it going in hindsight. But I ended my recording and walked over to my child, and the first responding officer asked me what I was doing. I was like, oh, my child, she's right over here behind the column. She was kind of standing out of the sun. And so I got her, picked her up. We walked over to my neighbor's car. I put her book bag in the passenger side behind the driver's seat. And then I walked back around, noted that he didn't have a door handle on his rear passenger side. So I had to reach in there and grab it from the inside. I had to fumble with it to get her. And when I was leaning over to fumble in there and get that belt out, my shirt kind of rode up. And I heard the officer go, wait a minute. And then I felt him grab my left wrist because it was bracing on the frame of the vehicle. And it's also my, the firearm's on the left side. So that's obviously my purchase hand. That's the hand I use to grip. And so he secured my left hand, and I went, oh, no. and it clicked in my head. And I was like, my gun. And I stood up and I brought my right hand around and relaxed. And I said, it's my gun, isn't it? And he goes, yep, good thing you recorded all of this. And I kind of just looked down at my daughter because she's literally right there. I'm standing right over her. And she looks at me and she goes, Daddy, what's happening? So
Take your time.
it's really hard to see that because that face pops into my head. She didn't understand. And I said, Daddy's going to get arrested, okay, honey, and the policeman's going to take me away. But it's going to be okay. Mommy's pulling into the lot now, and it's going to be all right. And I started crying immediately. And I don't really remember what all I said. I, I've spent my adult life doing everything to avoid having to have a negative interaction with law enforcement, doing everything to be, decent, as John would say, good, sane, sober, moral individual. I never would have pictured myself being arrested on school property for a firearm. I've always kind of considered myself to be the individual that stands in the grocery store line or goes about their day walking in the mall or grabbing a bite to eat at the local McDonald's as the person that nobody else knows it. But I'm the one that's standing there, and if someone came in to harm all of us, if someone came in to kill some of us, I'll be the one to help. I'll be the one to at least give you a chance to get away.
Right.
As John said, you make peace with everything when you walk out that door. Tell your family you love them, tell them everything. And walk out that door, I do know that this might be the day I might not come home. And it could be possible that it might be because I'm standing somewhere at the right time to stop somebody from doing evil. And that's what I've always considered myself. But I don't consider myself, a lawman or anything like that. Just if I'm there and someone looks to do harm to me, my family, my loved ones, my friends, or any innocent lives in my immediate vicinity, I will act.
I just got back from the Active Self-Protection National Conference, and almost to a man and a woman, everyone there, just it's like a way you're wired or a gene that you have that you're just different and you want to protect other people if possible. And that's what most of these people were there for. And I totally understand what you mean. You don't have to be a cop or a fed or in the military necessarily to be someone who's there and prepared and has trained themselves and trained their mind. And like you said, have the spiritual and mental fitness to have thought things through, to have made sure that you tell everyone you love them, make sure that you have all those things squared away in your life so that you're not thinking about, in the moment of truth, if God forbid you're there when something bad goes down and you need to pull a trigger, or God forbid you get shot and you're dying, the last thing you want to go through your head is not, I shouldn't have yelled at my wife, or I shouldn't have said that, or I should have told her I loved her, or whatever. And so I feel like that's the kind of guy that you are based on this conversation.
I learned a long time ago through personal loss of my grandfather. And I am transparent about this because I feel that sugarcoating it or hiding it can make the pain worse. I lost my grandfather in 2009 to self-inflicted gunshot wound. He shot himself. And the last conversation we had, I told him I hated him. And something in my brain clicked. And now I don't care if you're a stranger on the street. I love you. We don't have any room in our hearts and not enough time in this life to harbor hate.
Yeah. I lost my oldest brother to suicide as well. So I know, our last conversation was just kind of okay. It was pedestrian. You know what I mean? Didn't tell him I loved him. It was just sort of like, hey, what's up? And, blah, blah, blah. And I don't have any huge regrets about that, but I definitely can relate to what you're talking about there with your grandfather. And I'm sorry that happened. So let's go back real quick to the incident at hand. You're now I assume you're telling your daughter, well, this daddy's got to go. I'll see you soon. And you're trying to keep your composure. So as you're being pulled away, what is the officer saying? I mean, I assume you said you figured in your head, okay, well, darn it, I forgot to put my gun away. I have it at a school. That's why I'm being detained at least. So what happens at that point?
Well, at that point, like I said, I saw her face, and that just it made me cry. I just began crying, thinking about all the things that I just thought. I do remember that I kept saying to them that I failed you guys. I failed my family. I know I kept saying that because I did. I felt like I failed. I felt like all the things I've done my whole life to keep this from happening, I failed.
Hmm.
Uh, we're 4 months into my marriage with my wife, and we're just fresh married, and I failed her already. And this is what I'm thinking. So I'm kind of just a mess.
Hmm.
I'm just a crying, red faced mess. And I don't say I cry a lot, but I definitely cry a lot. I
Yo,
cry
yo,
during any movies that have sad parts.
yeah, fellow crybaby here. No worries, no shame in that. Yeah,
Yeah,
my wife thinks
big old crybaby.
my wife looks over at me like it's a Hallmark commercial. Why are there tears in your eyes? I'm like, I don't know. I can't help it.
It just happens. But out of nowhere, my wife was in front of me, and I was like standing. I don't really remember them walking away from my neighbor's vehicle to the squad car. And I do remember saying something like, "Is this really happening right now?" And one of the officers, I think it was the arresting officer, I think he said, "Yes, this is." And I was like, "Oh man, oh man!" And I kept saying things like that. I failed, and oh man, and one of them, truth be told, remarkably, the officers were very gentle with me. I think they knew that they had somebody on their hands that wasn't going to fight him, wasn't going to give him any grief, wasn't give him any trouble, but was kind of a mess right now because they were shocked by this. And so they were gentle with me. And I turned around and my wife was there and she said, "We're going to get this fixed. We're going to get everything. It's going to be okay," or something like that.
Hmm.
And I just remember saying to her, "I'm sorry I failed you." And she told me I didn't fail her. It's not my fault. So they gave her my knives. And then one of the officers walked back to me because I was still standing there. And I did not know how to get into the car or into the SUV.
Hmm.
And because he kind of turned away from me to give them to her while I was standing there. And he turned and he goes, "Good." And I was like, "It's really stupid, but I don't know how to get in here, man." And he's like, "Oh, buddy. Oh, no." And I was like, "I'm sorry, man. I've not been in a police car like this before." And he's like, "You got to sit down and then turn your legs in."
Yeah, I'm very familiar.
And he helped me sit down. And yeah, he helped me sit down. And I turned my legs in and I smushed my hands. And because man, I've watched, the TV show Cops or something like that. And them guys they arrest and they put them in there. Sometimes it looks so easy getting into the back seat. It is not easy.
Yeah, it's one of the things they don't tell you. They don't prepare you for getting in the back seat of a police car, especially handcuffed behind your back.
No, it's difficult. Yes, it's difficult when you can't use your hands. And so he helped me readjust and everything. And when I got in, I kind of smushed the handcuff down on myself a little bit more. And he said something like, "Oh, that should have been locked in place." Like I guess I don't know how handcuffs work.
So there's different kinds of handcuffs. There's hinge and there's chain, but all of them are capable of being double locked. What that means is once the cuff is applied to the wrist properly, if you ever look at a handcuff key, there's a business end, there's a little pointy end on the other side. That pointy end is to press a button or move a switch. If you have Smith & Wesson handcuffs, that means the cuffs can't lock any tighter. They can't get tighter on you. It's to prevent happening what happened to
Yeah,
you.
see, that's what I thought he meant.
Yeah.
Anyway, he re-secured them, kind of loosened it a little bit because he said they were too tight. I wasn't really going to complain, I don't think, because I view that as being an excuse to try and get out of your handcuffs. And when we were headed to the police department, the detainment facility, the jail, they were kind of questioning me. They did the typical Miranda. The is it Miranda rights? The you have the right to remain silent. And he said, "With that being said, do you feel like you want to talk to us?" And I should have not talked.
Correct.
I should have, because I remembered afterwards hearing lawyers on some of the social media stuff that I follow and articles about how you should just shut up. And I just kind of said to him, I don't really remember exactly everything I said because I was still very emotional and still kind of crying and stuff. But I basically told him, I don't care. I've got nothing to hide. I wasn't trying to commit a crime or anything like that. I got nothing to hide from you guys. And so they started asking me, they were like, why'd you have one in the chamber? And because I keep my firearms chambered.
Yeah.
When I carry a firearm, I don't think I ain't watched on active self-protection the several instances where someone did not have a firearm chambered and it cost them their life.
My response to that would be, officer, do you have a firearm, and is your firearm chambered, or do you walk around without one in the chamber? I'm pretty sure you have a round chambered as well.
Yeah, I think he made sure to say, law enforcement, we can walk around with ours chambered, but we're law enforcement. And I know what my response was, because my response is kind of it's etched into my DNA. I carry one in the chamber because carrying one without is like thinking you can put that seatbelt on at 70 miles an hour
Precisely.
before you smash into that wall. We kind of discussed that, and I don't remember what all he asked me, but I don't think he asked me anything about, I think he said something to the effect of I was saying things inside that could make them think that they needed to arrest me for this. And they called it a discretionary arrest. I do remember that. And that means that they didn't have to,
right?
Unless they didn't, yeah. And so, and I've since gone through my recordings that I took, and I can't find anything that would make anybody think that I said anything that required me to be arrested.
Nothing threatening.
Unless me threatening to get if I was threatening to get a lawyer, that's not a threat.
No.
That's just saying I'm going to get a lawyer and I'm going to sue you. And that's about the most threatening thing I said. Now, my tone is probably the thing here, but I was there for 20 minutes with my tone remaining the same way, and they didn't call law enforcement until my neighbor came in drunk. And so I don't think, and you can in fact hear me say in my recording to one of the officers before I was leaving, I don't know why the school called you all. I'm guessing more in regards to him. And the officer, you kind of vaguely hear him in the background going, yep, because he's drunk. The man's clearly intoxicated. And so they weren't called on me. They were called on him. It just happened to be that I was carrying a firearm.
Right.
And in the state of Missouri, it is unlawful for anyone to carry a firearm onto the property of a school. The function of a school or anything sanctioned by the district school board or a school bus in the state of Missouri. And that's if you get arrested with a firearm on the property of a school in the state of Missouri, it's punishable up to a Class E felony. And it can be the felony because of a chambered round. If the round's not chambered, it's a misdemeanor.
Interesting. That's a weird delineation for them to have in the law, but whatever.
Yes. It's very kind of strange. And I do know the laws, and at the time I couldn't articulate it. As I stated, I was very emotional, but I knew it. I knew it at the time, and I should have said it, but I didn't. There's exemption to that law. As of August 28th of last year, they revised it. And they revised it because the state of Missouri has got a lot of rural schools. We've got a lot of schools out in the country. And what do we got a lot of? We got a lot of good old country folk.
Yeah.
Good old rednecks with their guns. And a lot of the times these country folks would be dropping their kids off at school in the morning, have a firearm up in the rack of their truck, or be carrying a firearm on them or something like that, getting ready to go hunting or go to the range with some buddies and whatnot, or something, or picking their kid up after hunting
So
or
what?
something like that.
How did the revision read in the law?
The revision reads as this: Subdivision 10 of subsection 1 of this section does not apply if the firearm is otherwise lawfully possessed by a person while traversing school premises for the purposes of transporting a student to or from school. So both of my firearms are lawfully possessed that I own. I own 2 handguns. I've been through licensed dealer to get them, background checks, everything. Before this occurred, I was one of the guys that could literally walk into a gun shop, get a background check, walk out 15 minutes later with a gun. Because I got nothing on my record. And so I was traversing school property for the purposes of locating and retrieving my daughter.
So I assume you're in the middle of this legal process now. So talk to us about that. It sounds like under this revision that the arrest was potentially unwarranted. So where are you at right now in the legal process? I'm sure the listeners want to know.
Right now, we on the 19th, we have another hearing me and my wife are going to go to. It's the council hearing to see if we've got a lawyer yet. So we were literally just starting this. And I'm hoping, I don't really want to go with a public defender because the county that I'm in, the public defenders are notorious for just deals. And this is something that I feel, and I've talked to a number of lawyers as far as trying to get retainment and stuff. And there's very few of them that have stated that this is not something that can be dismissed. All say, well, I mean, that law is there. And from the sounds of it, it sounds like you were there looking for your kid to transport her home.
Yeah, I would concur with
and
that.
So, and so mainly the point that we're at right now is we need to get retainment of a lawyer, which ultimately we might end up going with the public defender if we can't enough money saved up. It's been very hard because I've been suspended from my other job. I only recently got a new job that's way less hours than what my other job was. My other job was a solid 80 hours a pay period.
Right.
And this one, my paycheck from them first time was like $195.
Yeah, that's not going to get it done.
Whereas I'm used to $1,200 paychecks being able to pay for things.
Right.
We're about to lose our home because of all this. My child's no longer in school. I'm homeschooling her. So I go to work and then I get off work in the morning and I homeschool her for the day. We can't ask the school to lose her, and I'm now banned from all school properties in the district, in the area, until next year. So my wife working 40 minutes away, it's kind of impossible to put her in a new school and transport.
So let's talk about lessons real quick before we wrap up. I think there's a couple things we can take away from this. One, well, first let me state as a disclaimer, we don't have the other side of the story, so we're going with what Chris is telling us, and I don't have any reason to doubt anything he's saying. I mean, if he wanted to tell a story, it would be that he walked in there and didn't yell and scream and didn't curse, but he was honest with us about that. So I think the two lessons are this. One, no matter how irate you are, that raising the temperature in there, and I'm sure if you can go back and do it again, it would have done a little differently. Raising the temperature in that confrontation didn't help, right? It's your right to do that. I'm not castigating you for speaking up for yourself, but I feel like if you could have just dialed it back a little bit, you might not have come to the attention of the officers. Here's the other thing I want to say. That was a discretionary arrest, potentially an unlawful arrest, depending on how the law reads, this revision reads. But those officers were probably unhappy with you because you were making a stink, and saw a reason, an excuse, if you will, to detain you and kind of ruin your day and potentially your life. I need to tell officers and deputies and agents listening to this, when someone is upset with the situation, they're upset with an arrest, they're not mad at you. They don't know you, right? You're all you are to them is a uniform and a badge for the most part. And they're yelling at the authority symbol. They're yelling at the badge, at the system, and not you. You can't take it personally, and you can't allow your being yelled at and screamed at by someone to influence your decision, especially not on an arrest. An arrest is a serious thing, especially for someone like Chris, who has a completely clean record. This is not an insignificant thing. You arrest people every day.
people like Chris don't get arrested every day, and this is a new thing for them, and that's going to affect the rest of his life potentially. So you have to ask yourself, was he actually threatening anyone with this firearm? No, it was lawfully carried otherwise, aside from the potential question of being on school grounds. And it wasn't in play. You saw it because he was strapping his kid into the car. So do you really want to go forward with this? And the fact that he told you this was a discretionary arrest is kind of says it all. It didn't need to happen. This was not necessary. So I think both sides have some things to think about, if that makes any sense.
Exactly. Well, one of the things that I've been thinking about, and because I want any of the listeners to know that when something like this occurs in your life, don't shrug it off. You need to sit, you need to process it, you need to think about it. It's not, it's not the end of the world, but it's certainly something that's going to change the gravity of your world.
Right.
It's going to change the very foundations of how you operate, and you need to think about every aspect of it. And just like, you said, Mike, I would have, if I could take it back, I would only take back the tone and volume of my voice. Mm-hmm. I would say everything that I said.
Right.
But I would say it in a more calm manner, because I was not wrong for saying the things I said.
Yeah, exactly.
Everything I said, and I believe at that time I was speaking for every parent in the world that has children, that you can't lose your children. But I was hot-headed a bit. Now, I didn't, make no ludicrous threats or any body language suggesting that I was gonna, I didn't shake my fist at nobody or nothing like that. And not at one point did anybody even realize I was carrying a firearm. I didn't lift my shirt and go, yeah, look at this thing or anything like that. But as you can clearly see, because I went in there kind of hot-headed, I'm in heat-wise, yelling. Whether or not I'm right about yelling is besides the point, because officers really, what they're seeing is they're seeing a guy who's real pissed off, pardon my wordage, and he's got a gun.
Right. And
so what do they from there? What do you go from there? I mean, I know the situation plays out itself as I'm leaving, I'm actually leaving, I'm cooperating and doing what they're telling me to do, but I'm still frustrated guy with a gun. And I'm on school property. And what kind of political environment are we in right now?
Yeah.
So I would have not went in there yelling. As far as the having a firearm on me, I didn't think about it. In my mind at that bus stop, my child was
preoccupied.
Saying,
of course,
let me take the 5 minutes real quick.
Yeah.
Go lock it up in my safe or something. No, I thought every second counts. I got to get to the school. That's all I was worried about.
So this is why we do this show, because it didn't occur to Chris. He wasn't intended to go there with a gun. I'm sure if he hadn't been so distracted and preoccupied with his missing 6-year-old daughter, he would have thought, oh, let me go lock this up inside, or let me lock it in a safe or something in the car, whatever. So the reason we do these shows is so you can learn from these other experiences. And I think today was a really valuable lesson for both halves of this story. I think the law enforcement officers need to remember they represent the system, they represent the state, and they're sworn to uphold the Constitution and to not allow someone's demeanor. They call it contempt of cop. You can't allow someone's demeanor to have any influence on your decisions unless it's something where they're clearly unstable or whatever. But Chris had a legitimate complaint. He was expressing it. If he can go back, he would change it. And I'd like to think that if the officer can go back, knowing the damage this has done to Chris's life, that he would change his decision. But will never know that. Chris, we are out of time. I cannot thank you enough, man, for coming on and giving us this story. I think our listeners are going to learn a valuable lesson from this. And keep in touch. You have my email, and let me know how this is playing out. I want to keep me informed and up to date. And I'll give an update to our listeners down the road when we find out more of what happened. Stay tuned for the Gutowski Files following this. Chris, thank you so much for coming on. All right, gang. Welcome back to the Gutowski Files featuring Stephen Gutowski, our intrepid reporter. He is the host of the Weekly Reload podcast and the founder of TheReload.com, where you should go and consider getting a membership, because Stephen needs to pay his bills, and he does that through his members' generous contributions through their membership. And we're always happy to have you. Good to see your face, although no one else can see it. Nice to see your face, Stephen. How are you, sir?
It's nice to see your face too.
No, it's not. So right before we hit the record button, he and I were debating the relative merits of making this a audio and video podcast. So it's in the works potentially, folks. We're gonna see what we can do about that. I don't know why anyone would
put
want
it in the comments what you guys think, what you want to see.
Yeah, leave us a review.
I think everyone would like to see more of Mike and that gorgeous beard.
Yeah, no, I don't think so. I think. If you do, leave us a review. Yeah, if you want a video podcast, let us know. We want to know. Want to make the people happy. So this week we are discussing an article over at The Reload, written by contributing writer. Was that what you'd call it, Jake?
Yeah,
Jake Fogelman.
Contributing writer Jake Fogelman. We'll have to have him on this show.
Nice.
At some point in the near future. I think that'd be great.
So go ahead. So to read you the headline, and then I'll let Steven explain it, because I'm not even going to try to explain this. It's rather complex legal stuff, but. The headline is gun groups file suit against California law designed to discourage gun lawsuits or suits. And California is up to their old shenanigans again, it sounds like. Steven, tell us what's going on out there.
Yeah, so this one's interesting because I think it's gotten very little attention for how important it is. It actually stems from the Texas abortion law that's gotten a lot of coverage, a lot of attention. But this particular section of it hasn't gotten much attention either. And obviously California copied that Texas abortion law, but applied it to guns, right? They sort of out of spite. They're like, if you're going to do this for abortion, we're going to do it for guns, right? That's sort of the idea here. And so that section of the Texas law got carried over into the California law. And effectively what it says is if you file suit against a California gun law, specifically the gun laws, you will have to pay the legal fees of California, even if you ultimately win and the law you're challenging is struck down. And this is for all gun laws in California. So long as you lose on any claim, oftentimes when there's a gun rights challenge brought against a state, they'll have several claims, right? That they make in their lawsuit. It's not just a single claim that they're making, but they'll have multiple claims in ways that the law is unconstitutional in their view, right? And it's pretty common for a case where you read a headline that the gun rights group won, then the law got struck down and declared unconstitutional. They might not necessarily win on every single claim that they made, and sometimes they'll make claims that are in the vein of, well, okay, if you don't think it's unconstitutional for this reason, here's a more limited, argument about why this section is unconstitutional.
Kind of like a reserve on an auction item.
Sort of, right? Yeah. And so that's not an uncommon thing to do in litigation. And the problem with this law is that it makes it so, one, the prevailing party can only be the government in this case, under this law. And, when it comes to legal fees in this manner. And so anytime the government wins on any claim in a lawsuit over guns, the plaintiffs, the people challenging the law, will have to pay the legal fees of the government, even if the plaintiffs ultimately won on the larger question of whether the law was unconstitutional. And so it kind of flips things on its head to how they normally work. Because normally if you win your case against the government, they have to pay your legal fees. Mm-hmm. The other thing this law does is that it makes it so the lawyers themselves will also be responsible for paying these legal fees. So everyone involved in the plaintiff side, the individual claimants, the groups, gun rights group that might get involved, and their lawyers will all be held responsible for paying legal fees. And it's basically just designed to try and prevent people from suing the state.
I could see how it would have an extremely chilling effect on people contemplating a suit against the state. That seems unbelievable to me, frankly. So what is their stated purpose for this law? What are they claiming it's for? They're not claiming it's to dissuade people from filing suit, obviously. So what's their reasoning?
Well, California adopted this law because it was in the Texas law. I mean, there isn't really they didn't come out and give like a defense or this law in California is a very cynical thing that is done as a way of saying, well, if you're going to do this for abortion in Texas, we're going to do it for guns in California, and it's sort of a tit for tat situation. One that, frankly, if a court doesn't stop this provision from being enforced, now this law hasn't gone into effect yet. That's a key thing to remember here. It doesn't go into effect until the beginning of next year. And so the gun rights groups that are suing over this are trying to block that law from going into effect. And if the Texas version of this law or the California version doesn't get blocked eventually, you can expect to start to see this everywhere else in the country, I would think, for all kinds of different issues. There's no particular reason why it would have to be limited to just gun laws or just abortion laws. If the courts don't do something about this, and look, a lot of people think this is sort of obviously unconstitutional. There was a previous attempt to block this law as part of another lawsuit in California over their magazine limits, if I'm remembering correctly, and that was dismissed by the Ninth Circuit without prejudice, meaning that they could refile it again because the larger issue, the case over the magazine limitations in California was remanded down to the lower court for reconsideration, and so as part of that, the higher court just didn't take up this issue essentially, but says you can take it up when you relitigate this case again at the lower court. So this is the second attempt. I believe there's also, this one is the Second Amendment Foundation and Firearms Policy Coalition, who are bringing this case alongside Cal Guns Foundation. There's also going to be another suit that's in the works for being filed over this exact issue from the California State Rifle and Pistol Association, the NRA affiliate in the state. So you're going to have several challenges to this law making their way through courts soon. There haven't been any progress on the Texas version that I'm aware of as far as challenges or rulings. So right now it's an open question as to whether or not this is going to stand. And if it does, I like the effect, I think is going to be very chilling, basically making it a lot harder to sue the state over their various laws.
Yeah, I'm not a fan. I know you always keep up with this stuff, so we will, I'm sure, hear more about this in the future. So folks, do us a favor, listen to this Gutowski Files episode every week, but also go over to thereload.com where there is a lot more information. You get a lot more in-depth information if you read Jake's article, and get a feel for what's going on with this. And Stephen relies on your membership to continue his important work over there. So if you are lamenting the lack of down the middle, sane, sober reporting on the Second Amendment and all things gun related, go give him a look. thereload.com and consider getting a membership. Stephen, I thank you so much for being on, and we'll see you next week.
Absolutely.